Let me say what a privilege it is to make this very first presentation of these findings from Dasra's baseline study of adolescents in Jharkhand. Before I go into the findings, let me just say what a successful transition to adulthood looks like. So here are 7, nothing greatly surprising to you, key markers of a successful transition, and they range, as you see, from the completion of a secondary school education to the elimination of child marriage and early childbearing, a successful school-to-work transition, and so on. I'll be talking, the 4 programs that we're working on, the 4 partners we're working with, are implementing programs that are directly associated with 4 of those, which you see arrowed there. But indirectly, their work will be affecting all 7 of these key markers to a successful transition to adulthood. Yeah. Let me say a word about the baseline. Dasra is committed to evaluating the effect and the acceptability of this program so that experiences can inform scale-up and replication, something we just talked about in the previous section. And so with that in mind, we have conducted this baseline, which will tell us what the situation of adolescence was before Dasra's partners started implementing their program. This survey was conducted in both project sites, that is what we call the interventions areas, as well as a well-matched other parts of Jharkhand in which Dasra will not be working, which we call the comparison area. We'll do a similar survey after the program ends to understand the extent of change that can be attributed to the Dasra program, as opposed to change that happens as the normal course of time. So we'll be able to attribute what change happened as a result of our programs. This is called a quasi-experimental design, and that is what we will be doing in maybe another 3 years or another 5 years. So let me start by saying we measure change among girls and boys, among younger adolescents, 10 to 14, and older adolescents, who we define as those aged 10 to 21. And because girls, but not boys, marry in adolescence, we will also be looking at married girls in the ages 15 to 21. Yeah. So this was our sample. Now I'm coming to the baseline findings. We went to 41,000 plus households, from which we selected about almost 16,000 boys and girls, as I said, in these 5 groups. Yeah? So let me quickly go to the findings before I'm told to shut up. Let us go to schooling first. Here are 3 schooling outcomes. The top panel, the one on top, is adolescents aged 10 to 14, and the bottom one is on adolescents aged 15 to 21. Some things to note: about 2/3 of both boys and girls aged 10 to 14 have completed class 5. So look at the top panel. So there's not much gender difference. About 2/5 of older adolescents have completed class 10. Remember, this is one of our markers of a successful transition. Only 2/5 have achieved this. Gender differences are not visible, but you see that married girls are particularly vulnerable. Coming to the next one about current schooling, almost all younger adolescents were in school at the time of the interview. Just 2/3 of older boys and unmarried older girls were. just 1 in 10 married girls were. So that is the second set of bars that you see in the middle. Again, we don't see much gender difference, but we see quite a bit of marital status difference. And finally, regular attendance in school, that is in the week preceding the interview, was far from 100% for all adolescents. 2/3 of all groups except married girls attended school in the last week regularly. Okay? Yeah. Let me quickly come to learning outcomes. Here are where the differences emerge. Learning outcomes were typically poor, boys, girls, married, unmarried, everyone. But some things to note. Gender differences are becoming wide. At each age, boys were far more likely to know, for example, that Delhi is the capital of India than were girls. And shockingly, so few know that Delhi is the capital of India. When we come to reading levels, the ability to read a small story, class 2 level, were similar for boys and girls. You see the levels are low in both cases, but they were particularly poor, again, among married girls. Numeracy skills show, again, huge gender differences, with far fewer girls than boys able to complete a 3-digit division sum, which is a basic necessity. And we've asked many more questions, which I don't have time to show you. And married girls, of course, are far worse off than the unmarried. So major gender differences, overall levels are limited. Yes? Coming now to agency. Agency for us to operationalize is the ability to exercise choice and voice in matters affecting one's own life. And we see, whether we're talking about decision-making, freedom of movement, or control over money, that few adolescents have that kind of control in their own lives. So we asked about participation in decisions on various matters affecting adolescent life. And here is the percentage of adolescents who participate, or if schooling was discontinued, participated in schooling-related decisions. How much homework, how much schooling to have, so and so. And the first set of bars that you see at the far show that 100% participation was far from achieved for any group. But boys were far more likely to report decision-making authority than were girls at each age, even among the younger adolescents. Oh, I can't finish in that much time. Okay, she's telling me I have 2 minutes to go. So whether you look at mobility, the freedom of movement, you see particularly among the older girls, there's a big gender gap. And finally, when you look at access to money, it's particularly limited. Yeah. Child marriage, for the whole of Jharkhand, you see that 4% of girls married below age 15, and 33%, 1/3, married below age 18. And we often talk about child marriage, but we don't talk about choice in marriage. And here you see that large proportions married without any informed consent. Indeed, 58% met their husband at the wedding day. Then we come to, come to fertility, and you see that children are bearing children. So, although we'd see that hardly any give birth before they're 15, a large proportion, 12%, is already giving birth before they're 18, and 39% have given birth in adolescence. Pregnancy histories of married girls also shows that large proportions have already experienced pregnancy. 13% have had 2 or more children. So it's all depicts a very vulnerable situation of adolescence. Looking at other dimensions, which I really don't have time to talk about, knowledge about health-promoting behaviors, transition into sexual life before marriage takes place among significant minorities, mental health issues that were discussed last session were also quite prevalent. Substance use, also something discussed earlier. And many adolescents were aware of Sayyas and Anganwadi workers, but few said that they had received any services from them. So the agenda is long, and I'm not going to, with deference to Shivani, go into them. But just want to say, these are our top-line findings. There's plenty more in the report. Stay tuned, we're still writing it. Thank you.